Welcome to the School of Impact's podcast, The Impact Salon, continuing our series on the invisible man in higher education. Today, I have the privilege to introduce you to Mr. Ken Redd, Senior Director at NACUBO for Research and Policy Analysis. Welcome to the show, sir.
Well, Bobby, it's great to see you, and I really am honored and privileged to be joining you today. So thank you for the invite.
Not a problem. So tell me a little bit about what does it mean to be a Senior Director of Research and Policy? What's your day-to-day look like?
Yeah, so for NACUBO, I should step back and for the audience who may not be familiar with us, NACUBO stands for the National Association of College and University Business Officers. We're a nonprofit 501c3 association of about 1,700 universities across the United States, public colleges, private colleges, community colleges. Uh, we represent the business interests, so the finance interest of our member schools. And we do, as part of that, we do a number of analyses, research on various topics related to finance. So for me, that means managing our data collection related to, we do an annual survey of endowments.
Mm-hmm.
We do an annual survey of institutional financial aid at private colleges.
Mm-hmm.
And we
But
also do an annual
let's
survey of,
actually explain what a
uh,
business officer, the business and finance department really does. So most universities are nonprofits or foundations of a certain style because they carry or have what are called endowments. Can you talk more about what maybe the average size of an endowment looks like for a university, or what the total size of the U.S. endowment is, just to give people
yeah,
the scope of scale?
yeah. So our association, NACUBO, we're in our another milestone year. We're in our 50th anniversary of conducting our annual survey of endowments. So it's become a big part of our work. It's our largest research effort. And we are doing this year's study, our 50th anniversary study, with a group called Common Fund, which is a investment advisory firm that helps uh, universities and colleges manage their endowments. So your question is very appropriate. It's a big part of the work that I do and what NACUBO does as well. But uh, maybe a lot of folks who know something about endowments, they think really big endowed funds like
Mm-hmm.
Harvard, Yale, Stanford. Those literally 10, 20, 30, $40 billion endowments. Those certainly grab the headlines, but most schools' endowments that we study are pretty small,
Mm-hmm.
relatively speaking. So our typical endowment is 250 million or below, which for an individual person that might sound like a lot, but the endowments help fund everything from student financial aid programs to faculty research to
Mm-hmm.
student enrichment programs. So very quickly,
Mm-hmm.
but the what people fail to realize is usually that $10 billion fund
Mm-hmm.
is made up lots and lots of individual funds that are used by the medical school, the law school. They're used to manage buildings and grounds, and those are restricted funds. So legally speaking, a school can't just take money from one endowed fund and use it for financial aid. They have to essentially they
Right.
have to get an endowed gift or some sort of
Right.
other money in order to do that. They couldn't take it directly from Fund A to move to Fund B,
For
not
that
legally.
purpose, right? And not
Sorry, but
legally and openly.
yeah,
But what I find also interesting, and I think is a point of information that might help connect the dots on endowments. There's also how a university is funded, so the economics of how the university system works.
yep.
And so endowments are a type of fund that allow the university to put that 10 billion into the actual capital markets. And people within the business office typically are responsible for selecting those investments, selecting how many years that investment stays out, and also at larger funds, typically at the Yales, the Stanfords, 1 billion or more, typically, you'll have a section within that fund called alternative investments.
Yep.
And within that segment of funding, they're allowed to then make what would be considered riskier investments into startups, or as an institutional investor into other funds that are investing into startups or new ventures.
Yep,
And
sure,
it's
sure.
one of the ways that universities can afford to continue to have sponsorship programs, continue to have do you know the total amount of endowments that are a part of NACUBO?
For our most recent survey, which was fiscal 2022, is roughly $840 billion of the schools that we survey
Really?
were in endowments.
I
So
you know
yeah,
I would have thought you were over a trillion by
not quite.
now.
No, not quite yet. Not quite yet.
Okay, okay.
Uh, but in our survey, we survey roughly 1,000 or so institutions, which we
Hmm.
get uh, about 60% or 70% who actually participate. So we don't get the entire pot
Ah,
of money in terms of endowment. So I don't know what the in the United States. I don't know. I couldn't tell you off the top of my head how much is in all endowments, but in our survey,
mhm.
it's roughly, as I said, as of fiscal year 2022, is just under $840 billion.
So what I hear, there is some room to grow in membership.
There's always, absolutely, always room to grow in membership, and always room to. We welcome all schools who
That's
participate
right.
to
That's right,
participate in
Ken.
our
Sell
survey.
it.
Absolutely, absolutely.
All right. So how did you get into this work? I mean, so this is technically speaking, you work in higher education. You work for one of the most prestigious organizations in higher ed. How did you start to think about? Did you just go to college and there was a program for working at NACUBO, which I don't imagine?
It'd be kind of funny if there were, but no. I went to. I'm from New England. I'm from Boston originally, and I
Mhm,
went to Tufts University, which is just outside of Boston. And
mhm,
but I was always interested in issues of policy and
mhm,
how leaders sort of think about uh, policies, and what are some of the best strategies for really improving service to citizens.
mhm,
That led me to get after college to get a master's in public affairs, public policy
mhm.
from the University of Minnesota. As I graduated of the Humphrey School, and from there I actually started my career in higher ed. I didn't start in Cuba. I actually started at the Library of Congress,
Okay.
where we I learned about some of the basic federal financial aid programs, and that's really where my first the first part of my career was really on student finance as opposed to institutional finances.
Hmm.
So I did that for a while, and uh, I ended up getting to NACUBO like many folks. I'd been around. I've worked in associations for prior to NACUBO for a number of years, and had learned about NACUBO. I knew about the endowment study, and eventually I was very fortunate in that my former boss at the time actually recruited me to come. I asked me if I
Wow.
would be interested
Okay.
in helping to run the research department, and so as I said, that was about 15 years ago, and I said yes, and certainly I'm glad that that has worked out. And, through the years, I have learned more about institutional finances from the
Mm,
standpoint you mentioned endowments and uh, uh, financial aid programs from the perspective of how they're funded by institutions as opposed to funding for students,
mhm,
and some other topics that we cover. So it really was, having been in the association world in Washington D.C. for a little while, and it's a relatively small community. I think, fortunately for me, within that community, I think my work has been, well regarded, I would say, and that led me to being asked to come on board with NACUBO, and I've been there since.
great story. If you don't mind sharing, what was the company that you worked with your
Yeah,
prior boss before?
yeah. So before coming to NACUBO, I spent about 2 years with a group called the Council of Graduate Schools, which is an
Oh,
association of graduate school deans, and we studied mostly academic type programs. And prior to that, I was with a group called the National Association of Student Financial Aid Administrators, or NASFA,
Hmm.
And as the name would suggest, we did a lot of work there on financial aid for students. So I did a number of studies, surveys, data collection on how students put together their financial aid packages and
Hmm.
how they can afford their tuition. So I spent about 6 years there. So those are my two stops prior to coming to NACUBO.
How has
And
NACUBO responded, and what has been its general advisory towards universities
yeah,
during this critical time?
so I should back up slightly and say,
Hmm.
even before the Supreme Court's decision, NACUBO has had a long-standing interest in diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Hmm.
We had a very strong statement on our website in support of campus's efforts to diversify. And yeah, even despite the Supreme Court's decision, we are committed to doing what we can to help campuses diversify, not just in their student enrollments, but in their business office
Hmm.
uh, personnel.
Right.
As not a lot of viewers may not know this, but they would probably suspect that for much of time, chief business officer, the head finance person at most universities
Hmm.
have been largely white and male.
Hmm.
And we, long before the Supreme Court's decision or any other things going on, we have done a number of surveys, a number of uh, programs that we launched to try to uh, get the pipeline a lot more diverse so that the
Hmm.
next generation of CBOs and others going into the college business office look more like America.
Yeah.
We have continued on with that work. We have what we call our fellows program, which essentially is
Hmm.
those folks who are at the associate or assistant vice president level who want to get additional training and skills to move up into the chief business officer role. And that
Hmm.
our fellows class has grown over the years and has become a lot more diverse. And we are seeing a number of our fellows go through the program actually get hired to be CBOs, chief business officers.
Right.
So we're very proud of that. We also have launched a new business officers program, which for people who are in their first or second year of the in a CBO role could kind
Hmm.
of get that additional training and support that they might need.
Hmm.
And we also have additional programs as well that try to reach out to uh, folks who are sort of early to mid career and want to learn more about what's it like to work in a business office and
Okay.
how they can sort of begin to that advancement stage.
Right.
So those programs, as I said, they're both very important
Hmm.
to who we are as an association, and also I think they're important for our country. I mean, I'll be honest with you. I think we can't continue to look backwards and think,
Right.
we have to deal with America as it is now, not as we
Right.
wish it
Right.
were, 10, 20, 30 years ago.
Hmm.
And the upcoming populations are much more diverse. And so
Right. Need to adapt.
we need a lot in higher ed in general, but certainly in the business office, we need a lot more uh, uh, African American, Latino, Native
Hmm.
Americans, and other
Hmm.
folks, because that's what our students are going to look like.
Absolutely.
And I mean, uh, the the thing that I think we have to realize is that um, uh, a lot of that mentoring and things like that starts at campus
Hmm.
is because someone like myself, when I was a student at Tufts, at a predominantly white school, I would seek out uh, professors and staff members and others who frankly looked like me,
Right.
and that's just a natural thing. There's nothing wrong with that.
Absolutely.
So it doesn't make any sense for colleges to try to hire in ways that they hired previously when more of
Hmm.
their students are are are, are folks of color or folks who are indigenous to the U.S. And
Hmm.
so I, I say this, it obviously is something that I believe in and have
Right.
been fortunate to be a part of NACUBO's DEI efforts. But it's something that's important to us as an organization and has been, as that before, long before the Supreme Court's decision.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say, we understand too that we have member schools across the country. We have member schools in blue states, red states, purple states,
Right.
and we understand that at we can sort of set the tone that works for us, but individual staff, individual campuses have to comply with their state's laws.
Right.
So I say that to say that we understand that in some states this is a more nuanced, based on the Supreme Court
Discussion.
and other
Exactly.
and other things that other states are doing too.
Mm-hmm.
I think, and I hope as time goes on, we will be providing more guidance for how folks who might be in states that might not agree with where we think college is going. How do you navigate that? Because there are as we go on. One thing I'm optimistic about is that despite the rhetoric, there are lots of strategies that campuses can follow, which are perfectly legal.
Absolutely.
Still, but get us to the same goal of having a more diversified and inclusive environment. I don't see myself. I think I'll be frank. I would never agree with much of what the Supreme Court does. Never mind the decision on affirmative action.
Right.
But I also don't think that it's the death knell for these efforts. And in fact, just the opposite. I see more. Even in red states, I see more activity in this area from folks saying, "Hey, what can we do to try to, we have to be in compliance with the law. We're not going to do anything illegal or immoral, but
of course,
but we still have this strong belief. What can we do to try to continue on with what we're doing?"
Right.
And I think the solutions are out there, and so I remain an optimist in this area.
How do you interpret the needs of the business office moving forward? Like where is NACUBO looking in the future to kind of provide support from the research perspective?
Yeah, so I think that's a really good question. So this is something that we actually do talk quite a bit about. Much of the work that we've done in the past has been survey based. And you probably know this from the work that you do, Bobby, is it's getting harder and harder for folks to respond to surveys. So
yeah,
I think the transition for us, but we still need to be we need to do work that's impactful. And so we still need the data and the stories that come from those traditional research projects, but we have to do them in different ways. What I hear from our members is, I still value the information that you provide, but I just don't have the time to sort of participate myself. So we need to figure out other ways to collect data. And that could be through storytelling. It could be through much smaller and more targeted surveys. It could be just rather than us going out and trying to collect data, it could be inviting people to tell their own stories and how they've sort of overcome challenge and what obstacles and opportunities they faced. Because the one thing that has not changed in this era is folks like to hear stories from people who look like them, who've had the similar experiences as they do. I think there's a lot of value in that. So I would say, this may happen after I leave NACUBO. I don't know how quickly this transition will happen, but I can foresee for sure us being a little more targeted, a little more focused on really small segments of research rather than the traditional big research studies that we've done in the past.
Right.
But I also think too, the advantage of being at a place like NACUBO is that the research that we do it's really used. It's picked up by the press. It's picked up by our schools, like instantly. Every year we put out our endowment survey, and literally hundreds of newspapers have stories about it throughout the next several weeks after.
Right.
So that's a lot of impact right there. I
Hmm.
don't think that
Hmm.
will change, but I do think what will change is we'll take what we traditionally do, and to use that study as an example, and
Hmm.
rather than like one like comprehensive release, maybe we do smaller things. Maybe we talk about returns, and that generates a lot of press. And then maybe we do a smaller survey on asset allocations, and that generates press for a little while. And
Hmm.
so those kinds of things, and these are things that we've talked about. I'm not telling tales out of school. These are things that we've kind of talked about. Like what's sort of the next iteration of NACUBO research, and trying to keep the same impact, but with sort of a less burdensome approach to our members and
Good.
friends. So
Thank you, Ken, for just making time to come on the show.
yeah, well, this has been a lot of fun. Thank you for having me again. I'm honored you to ask and invite me. So this has been a lot of fun for me. So thanks again for having me on.
I appreciate it.